Hello, my name is Gorazd Ćosić and I would like to try to explain the solution to the problem of causality. I have problem with dyslexia, but you will notice it. Don't worry, I will put the subtitles. My intention is to give you some simple examples of the solution to the problem of causality, i.e., I would like to make it simpler, given that causality intertwines with space and time, consequently achieving the highest possible complexity. I solved this problem when I was a philosophy student. After working on it for 14 years, in 2016, I completed a book about that, and now I'm challenging the whole world to prove me wrong. I do not want to talk about the problem of causality. There is already a large quantity of relevant material on the topic. This lecture is primarily intended for those who are already familiar with the topic. If you think I'm wrong, or if there is something that you do not understand, feel free to comment. Such topic raised thousands of questions. In this lecture, I will introduce you to the existence of necessary connection between the cause and the effect, offer some irrefutable examples, and give reasons why the same effect has to occur after each repeated case. Here I primarily refer to this macro world. If we wanted to understand the solution, we will have to work upon our cognitive process. Move away from traditional forms of thinking. Conceptual thinking could be the most serious stumbling block. The way of thinking more compatible to the solution to the problem is process thinking. The way of thinking more compatible to the solution to this problem is process thinking. Causality should be viewed as a process going on. Each process is formed by its factors which have their identity, A equal to A. If we look at the process for the first time, for instance, a bird leaving its nest, here is something in this process that necessarily has to occur. And this cannot occur outside the laws of identity which this process consists of. Each factor in the process has its own identity, according to all that makes it what it is, a noumenon. Identities are necessities. They are the creators of everything and they govern everything. They are the absolute of causality, and each event is just their set in ongoing process. Each effect may occur only from these identities according to the laws of those identities which take part in this process. If not so, this could not happen the first time either. Any object has its necessity by the identity it possesses. Any existing space has only two possibilities, either being empty or not. If it is absolutely empty, it is necessary that nothing can happen in it. It is full, then it is filled with only what is inside of it. Therefore, only the causality of those factors which are in it can occur in space. All that exists has its own identity. and this is the first necessity, making it what it is and limiting it in what it is not. This is its necessity, which belongs to it in its whole real identity. This is all what it really is. Therefore, any atom cannot be something else at the same time except for what it is according to its size, shape, etc. Only what it is. If I name a concept, for instance a table, this indicates a phenomenon. But if I say that it has its identity, then I'm talking about a noumenon. Subtracting any part of the noumenon may influence the development of causality. This is the jigsaw of the absolute of the noumenal process, where we need to differ between A equal A if something is static and unalterable, or A equal A if something is alterable, because everything changed, panta rei. Necessity in itself. The fact that something is and cannot be different at the same time conditions its further occurrence among these identities, something that can be the subject or the object. How else could anything happen if there were not those factors and this dynamic? An effect can only occur from these factors and this dynamic. Only they can produce such an effect. On the other hand, if these identities did not have the necessity on such action in the first case either, this could not even happen, but something different must happen in each case. In this process, each existing identity can only be what it is, thus reacting only according to its own identity and the principle of excluding the other one. This principle is applied in situations where there is no other possibility but one. For example, by rolling a ball, something has to happen. It is impossible that nothing happens. Even if the ball suddenly disappeared, that would be an event which could not have happened without the ball rolling prior to it. Consequently, only which will happen can happen. It is like it already happened, since in the framework of these factors, and if we do not introduce any other, only this is possible. I want to stick to the macro world for now, and I do not want to go into the sphere of quantum physics. However, quantum physics displays a similar situation. Everything has its own identity, and only what is achievable by those identities or by the combination and order of events can happen. I would like to point out that this is not an issue of classical determinism, but of the identity law of the macro and micro world, whatever they are. Let us examine, for example, the movement of two persons toward one another. The collision is necessary. if they go one toward the other. The same will happen with the two balls. Their movement of one toward the other will cause a collision due to which the balls may break. There are numerous possibilities which can be imagined by all that can happen is always conditioned with the soul identities taking part in that process. Each identity can react only to its own identity, the one that it is, not the one that it is not, because here in this process there is no such a thing. It does not exist. The identity of that ball, as well as of all that exists in that process, possess a limitation to what is going to happen in this process. Therefore, one ball cannot be anything else except what it is. A ball, A equal to A, is its identity. The effect will always be conditioned by the identities of this individual process. The ball, pen, book, they all have their identity, movement, stiffness, and so the impossible cannot occur, i.e., what does not exist here cannot occur. Each of the identities has its own laws of interaction, and all these properties makes an atom. Dynamics is a necessary condition of causality, change. A collision between balls does not occur due to expectation, but because nothing else could have happened. As when two persons walk, a collision is unnecessary, while the reaction will depend on identities which they have in themselves. Are they nervous? Do they know each other? Etc. If we consider Matryoshka dolls, the smallest one can always be nested in the larger one, but the reverse is impossible. Think about trying to bring a 7-meter beam in a space with only one opening and of size of 2 square meters. Similarly, no man can enter a box of the volume of 1 deciliter or slip through the eye of the needle. Such attempt will always be unsuccessful. Identities impose that solid atom can be put into a liquid. An atom put on the light becomes illuminated. How is it possible for this not to happen in a repeated case without breaking the law of identity? This would mean that those identities are not the same anymore. Putting blocks one on the other, if we put 27 blocks together, we would get a bigger one. How many people can fill a room? Interaction among identities. One of the most mysterious necessities for which it cannot be said that it does not exist is the necessity of interaction among identities. Interaction among identities is necessary, although mysterious, as the sole understanding of the structure of the matter and all that is hidden inside it. Identity is what is necessary in each event, while each event always represents interaction among identities. It is impossible not to have interaction among identities. Each identity has its own rules, which are taking part of it as a noumenon and phenomenon. The identity speaks about the existence of these laws in whatever case something is what it is. That is real, so it is inconceivable that something exists as it is without interacting with any other identity. Each identity somehow interacts with all other identities if we put them in the same place. It would be impossible not to find a certain necessity between two identities, even if this would be a vacuum as an empty space. The absolute vacuum is in a necessary interaction with all other identities, so that something can be put into it. If, for instance, this is an empty space which does not let sound pass through it, this is a necessary interaction between these two identities. Indeed, it would be impossible for sound to be able to pass and not to pass through such a space at the same time. For example, light can go through a crystal ball, but it cannot go through a stone wall. It would collide with it, and it would not be able to go further. It is impossible to conceive and find any two identities so that there is no necessary connection in their interaction. If two objects cannot be found in the same place at the same time due to the nature of their identities, then this is considered their interaction. And if for another two objects this would be possible, this would again be due to the nature of their identities, the possibility to go through one another like light goes through water. The making a simple knot is conditioned by the movement of the rope in a certain direction. The same can be done by a snake or a climbing plant. The movement of a rope in a direction will always have to produce a knot if the rope identity does not change. This necessity between cause and the effect is the most observable as the necessary connection in the process where the movement of the rope in a direction is a cause, whereas the knot is the effect. This is an obvious example of causality where the necessary connection between the cause and the effect is visible at any time. If something exists, it has its own identity. at the same time it gives the necessity of its own self as well as the necessity of its interaction with other identities. These are laws without which all that happens could not happen. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain why something happened for the first time. Someone may imagine that under the given circumstances, the most varied and incredible effects could occur. But the world of identities bring one back to reality, where only what has been written down in the identity law, in the causality of given factors, can happen. Any effect has its necessary cause. To be able to understand the nature of causality, we have to reject our firmly created aspirations, conclusions, and habits. We have to act unconditionally, let ourselves to nature and harmonize with its logic. We have to be that process. Contemplation with our whole being in order to melt us into that process being. We have to accept this whole processualism in order for it to be revealed to us. We have to let it be what it is or what it is not, even if it does not exist. It is not up to it is not up to us to seek for a necessary connection between the cause and the fact, but to reveal the process, understand it, and how it functions. The revelation and understanding of this process, letting it be what it is our mission. If we sought a necessary connection in that process, we would impose something ours in it, thus suffocating the whole research. If for a moment I could be that process, or I could plunge into its depths by my own contemplation, only then could I see or experience the laws it carries in itself. This is how we make way to the understanding of causality and enter a new infinity empire. This is how we can reveal it, by accepting the process identity logic. How it is possible that two people moving one toward the other do not collide if everything has its own identity? Whatever happens, any time and any place, the necessity of the law of identity will always stand behind it, and without it nothing can even happen, and nothing at all happens. Without the assumption that there is a connection between cause and the fact, it would be impossible to think about reality. But to reveal it, we have to allow for its inexistence, so that in our search it could be revealed to us if it exists as it is, without our conscious or unconscious intention to form it in our being. It can be the hardest part, sometimes a part of an unconditioned research, but at the same time the most important part, thanks to which it is possible to dive into the world of causality, in the objectivity that belongs to it by its identity, which it owns as a process and makes every object exist as it is. This is true for all processes where A is equal to A. All the identities which are in a dynamic process make what we call causality, where by the classical methods we cannot see the connection between the cause and the effect. When we hear a speech, we will link it to a certain person. We'll link fire with warmth and we'll link fire with light and warmth, magnets to sticking to iron, gunpowder to explosions. We a priori know that everything has to have its properties by the sole fact that it is what it is. It cannot both be and not to be at the same time, both have or do not have its properties, i.e., identities. The same causalities occur without my presence. Why? When we say that something exists, for example, ropes, we talk about a phenomenon. But when we say that it has its identity, we talk about a nomenon. But if in an object's identity there is something which is indifferent to that process, such as, for instance, the color of the robe, then it is not important for that causality either. However, everything that takes part in a causality will have an effect, being that visible to me or not. Regardless of my cognitive powers and my experience, it is obvious that anything that exists has to have its own identity, which is what it is due to its being whatever it is, whether static like an absolutely empty space or dynamic as a stream. It has its identity in its wholeness, regardless of the limitation of my cognitive powers and my senses. It is necessary that the absolute identity of an object exists. For instance, a stone which has its identity, letting it be what it is, independently from my being. Whatever it is, like neither it nor anything else can escape its identity. Causality is the language of interaction among identities. Anything which is what it is cannot at the same time be and not to be what it is. All that is in the way it is. Their identity is their law. If we now meet an extraterrestrial race which is 10, 20 or more times smarter and advanced than us, they would also need, besides the more advanced senses or research instruments, certain higher dimensions of consciousness which we do not know, something superior to the mind and reason. However, even they could not escape the identity logic, even in case they could use their superior power to influence the change of the matter, so everything would again go on according to the rules of those identities inside that process. When a snooker cue moves toward a ball, a collision, i.e. contact, is imminent. The same happens when arms move one toward the other. Collision is necessary, and there is no other possibility. In the same fashion, the collision is not going to happen if before it the cue or arms stop moving. What happens here is the principle of excluding the other one, as well as the law of identity. They are the basic laws of nature's logic. In both cases, people can conclude about the effect whatever they want in their imagination, but the logic of physics, nature cannot overstep the laws of its identity. It cannot make a house from a grain of dust. Imagination is here for that. Those are its powers. Any object can be only what it is and is limited by its identity. But for a change to happen, a change in its identity has to occur. A glass of water is a glass of water, and we cannot turn it into wine. However, by pouring water into wine, a necessary change will occur. During any dynamic, such as the aforementioned, a change will necessarily happen, even if only a change in the position. What will happen always depends on the identities which are present in a certain space, on the movement direction, etc. Identities and all their occurrence are causalities. Identities and all their occurrence are causalities. They have their laws of interaction, which achieve what they achieve only by interacting. If that were not so, no causality would happen. How would we then explain writing with a pen, cutting hair, painting with a paintbrush, if there were not interacting among identities in the given circumstances? Each identity would react only according to its laws, i.e., its identity. Fire has always burned, water has always choked, but not because it is always, but because it is now. Fire and water have their own laws, identities. Therefore, those factors can do only this in a given situation. In any other case, they would have to break the law of identity, which could possibly happen in our imagination. But in the thesis, this is impossible. How could they be that if it was not like that? This is what it is. That is why it is important to understand the very nature of causality. It is in human nature to look for differences wherever it can find them. However, it can be completely unnoticed for someone. It can be given a new concept, new name, or the already existing given a new term. Water, rainwater, distilled water, it represents a change or a difference between the two objects, i.e. their identities. So, for instance, if we saw a burning fire which is not warm but cold, we would name it cold fire. So we could not expect from it the same as from the hot fire, because this is a completely new phenomenon, whose identity is still strange and unknown. Warm and salty snow is not snow anymore, but a completely new phenomenon, and its necessary effects are caused by its identity and the possibility of its interaction with other identities. Vacuum has the identity of size, volume, shape, and the law that something can be put into it and move. Nothing can be imagined or conceived without having its identity. How would things even happen if everything that is did not have its identity? Identity is a concept which by itself, by its sense, absolutely encompasses a noumenon, since causality includes a noumenon, whereas our cognizing only allows for phenomena. A noumenon shows its identity in the soul causality. As such, the soul noumenon is limited by its necessity of all that makes it what it is and separates it from what it is not, whether by shape or by properties which an object may have in itself or in its interaction or in its relation toward the other. Necessities. During each dynamic of first necessity. During each dynamic of one or more factor, it is necessary that something will happen, which would not have happened before by itself without those factors and this dynamic. Whatever happens is an effect of the formerly occurred, from which in each portion of time of the process occurred what we call effect. The effect would not exist without this identity's dynamic. Number 2. Only one event can happen. For example, in tying a knot, only one knot can happen. Number 3. The effect of each dynamic can be only a change within those factors which participate in the event which is the object of our intention in the given moment. If we were absolutely conscious of all the identities which nominally participate in the certain event, we would know about each of their identities, which in the given situation react in the way written down in their identities, and so participate in the whole causality. We could thus be able to reach better assumptions and, dependent on the power of our reasoning and mind, guess the effect for all cases. All the senseless assumption would so disappear, which based on a certain causality appear as a fruit of our imagination, not reality. When two persons collide, only the collision of the persons who found themselves in the same place at the same time can occur, not of three or more persons who are not there at the given moment, while the effect of the collision will be a result of the present identities. In each collision with a person, our reaction will, as well as the person's reaction, will be determined by the identities present in this situation. In this situation, we are more consciousness of the effect brought forth by our and the other person's reaction if we are aware of the identities participating in this situation, and which will due to that determine the effect perfectly. Therefore, in a perfectly empty space, nothing can happen because there is nothing in it which could change or move. Number 4. Each factor has its own identity, A equal to A. The question is whether we sometimes see objects which look the same as identical or different. The most obvious example can be made using twins. Each of them can have a different job, interest, hobby. Even cold fire would not make us warm, but for instance only make light or change its shape, i.e., what its identity can offer, a light which can, as part of its identity, go through space, or it could never be light. 5. Each event needs a certain dynamic. 6. causality has its own autonomy, irrespectively of me being if I am not its part. 7. Each repeated case is not a repeated case in the causality, even though it is a repeated case to us. Physics considers that as the first time to occur. The same cause has to lead to the same effect. Although it is impossible to talk about two absolutely identical objects or causes, it is not excluded, but tell us more about the limitation of our cognitive powers. The movement of the rope in a certain direction will produce a certain knot. Time is not a factor influencing causality. The sole causality is time, while causality always occurs in its time which is running. It is the same if it occurs now, before, or in 2000 years. The rope moving in that direction will always give the same knot. Therefore, it is pointless to ask if the same thing will happen tomorrow. Time does not exist for causality. It is time. Without dynamics, there would not be either time nor us. The human body could exist, but without dynamics, there is no human being in it. There is no possibility that at any time in the past or future, the movement of a rope in a certain direction does not make that knot without breaking the law of identity. From effect to cause. If we observe causality from the effect to cause, the angle from which we observe may not be good enough to notice the necessary connection. In order to see it better, we should change our standpoint and place it completely oppositely from the effect to the cause. When we see an effect, we a priori infer that something must have happened before that which caused that effect. Otherwise, what would be our claim? That something has happened by itself. Even if we made this claim and said that this watch appeared by itself as kind of a magic on that island, or if we claimed that the same for any other effect, it would necessarily be connected with that event, i.e., such things occur in that way according to these rules, or that magic, or ex nihilo. Hume gives the example of the watch on a desert island, which would lead to the conclusion that there were people on that island, although this is not a justifiably necessary conclusion. This watch, although less possibly have came in that spot in many different ways. Someone could have thrown it from a boat or plane. The sea may have thrown it out. Crows sometimes take shiny items and take them away. These are all inductive conclusions leading from the effect to the cause. What is necessary is that this watch was somehow made, appeared there, and this is a necessary deductive conclusion. Even though in many cases we are not going to find out how something happened, it is clearly that it somehow must have happened, and that without the thing that processed it, it would have never happened. In short, it is impossible not to have the previous thing, except in the case it is eternal. What could we otherwise conclude? How did it happen? Without a previous action, when we see an effect, it is a priori clear that something must have happened before, that in order for something to happen, because what would we otherwise claim? That something happened by itself. Even if we claimed so and said that, for instance, the watch appeared on the island by itself, or if we claim that the same for any other effect, it would necessarily be connected to that event. These things happen in such a way and under certain rules, and the reality of the soul process of a certain appearance or development of a condition cannot be negated, whatever that is. Furthermore, it is necessary that the watch and the place where it is, which represents the present condition, must have something which occurred before, and without which the present could not be. It is necessary that everything has to be in a certain way. All that is somehow is, and this is a necessity of what is and in the way it is. That is a necessity which can be ascribed everything a priori. This is a necessity which can be ascribed to everything a priori, as the identity of everything that is, whatever way that is. Necessity is found in itself, in this case in the object, making it its objective necessity to be as it is. I am in the classroom now, and this is the effect of my previous movement by which I reached this place. When I look at this from this perspective, from the effect to the cause, I see the necessary connection clearly. The effect is that I am here, while the cause is my former movement. This whole situation is made by different factors, and all these factors have their own identity. Me, the street, speed of movement, other passers-by. Everything that is in any way part of this situation, all have their identity. In circumstances when there are such factors, something must happen, because dynamics implies occurrence and change. But only what a certain situation and its factors have at disposal can happen, because everything that is has its own identity, which cannot trespass itself and at the same time be something that it is not. I'm drinking and I have water in my mouth. What is the cause of this situation? A different effect demands different causes. I see a mother hugging her child. Hugs are an effect. The cause is the movement of the body and arms in that direction. Is there other possible cause? Is there another possible cause? I'm walking along the street and I see the bridge which was here yesterday is demolished. I see the effect which cannot exist without a necessary cause. This book or anything else which can be taken as an example cannot be imagined or conceived if it does not exist and if it is not linked to some cause. Now that we have seen things from the effect to the cause, this necessary connection is more and more visible. And if this necessary connection exists from the effect to the cause, it is obvious that it must exist in the direction from the cause to the effect. This is the same necessary connection. What is different is the point of view. I cannot claim for an atom that it has forever existed, and what is not from forever has to have occurred somehow. This book, desk, or any other thing, they all have their process of occurrence linked to it, regardless of the way something occurs. So every effect is necessarily linked to its cause. This is the process of its occurrence. Various fantasists could imagine different reasons of an atom occur. But since I do not want to flirt this group of philosophers, I will shortly say that all their reasons would be subject of the aforementioned answer, even when it comes to the immaterial. This is the reason of these effects, occurrence, and this whole process has its own identity, which makes them indisputable from one another. Indisputable from one another. From cause to effect. If we look at the first instance of raining, we may ask, why has rain fallen for the first time and remained here as water? Which identities are behind this process? It is clear that each process is a set of identities without which this process would not even exist. It is clear that each process is a set of identities without which this process would not even exist. All the factors that take part in this process determine the effect according to its identity. Every time what will happen is only what the identities of all the factors taking part in the process allow. Water will always be in the place toward which it is moving, depending on its orientation, which is again under the causality of certain identities. It has to be somewhere, except if as part of its identity it has the power to disappear or turn into something else. If I touch the tip of my thumb with the tip of my forefinger, I will obtain contact between two fingers and a kind of circle. I would like to bring this lecture to its end now, and I would like to reach a conclusion. How can we conclude that the same cause will bring the same effect? This is possible if we deduce from inductive thinking, i.e., if we understand why something happened the first time. We will then understand why something is going to happen every time it repeats and why nothing else can happen in the given circumstances. Let us suppose that you are walking toward a wall and your body stops when you came into contact with the wall. The first question is why that happened and not something else. When we dismantle the whole process into simple factors, we will get you moving, the floor, the space you are walking through, the wall. What we have to understand is that every existing factor has its own identity and cannot be different at the same time. What we have to understand is that every existing factor has its own identity and cannot be different at the same time. Therefore, in the identity of the body as well as in the identity of the wall, there is no possibility of passing through one another due to the structure of those identities. This is not possible for these identities. That is why the only possible thing which could happen only by the contact of these identities happened. Therefore, in every repeated case, the same effect will occur. The body will stop when in the contact to the wall. The first time also, the only thing that was possible in the contact of these identities occurred. It is impossible that nothing happens. And the only thing that can happen depends on the identities which are taking part of a process. Each identity can react only according to what it is, not in any other way. This puts a limit on the effects, and so the only thing that can happen is what each identity brings to the process. Try to imagine any other possible effect without changing the identities we had in the first case. Any other effect needs a certain change of an identity in the process, which assumes a change in what Hume called a cause. Each repeated case will end up equally if the same identities are present, because each factor of that process has its own identity, which cannot be different at the same time, and can therefore not react differently. A wall cannot have the identity of a thing which a body can and cannot pass through at the same time. The same applies to a space you are walking through. Identity is the one limiting the possibility of an effect of the identity it owns. This is a simplified example of necessity in causality, and I think it does not offer a deeper understanding of the necessity of causality, but it is a powerful example indicating the necessity which is undisputable without changing any identity in the soul process. If we do that, then we change the soul cause, so the same effect cannot be expected. Thank you for following this lecture so